The last prince of the fallen Briel kingdom had been wandering the edges of life, seeking an end to his hollow existence. In his near-dead state, a dark figure approached, commenting that misery clung to him like a second skin. Rightfully so, given he had brought ruin to his own people. 10 years earlier, Yuri Brioli had been lost in a blur of dice and cards. Gambling was his obsession. He couldn't stop, especially since he won every round. Despite his family's mage urging him to leave early that night, he refused to listen. He was winning too much to care. His opponents, suspecting foul play, accused him of cheating. The accusation enraged him. In a fury, he flipped the table, then made a mistake. He declared himself the third prince of the Briel kingdom. Later that night, the prince met with Yekaterina Ivarna Granzine, the empire's princess. She expressed anger at his reckless arrival. His excuses only irritated her further. She tossed away the necklace he had gifted her in disgust. She told him not to speak to her again, leaving him unsure how to fix what had broken. Unbeknownst to them, a spy had overheard everything. By morning, damage had already been done. The empire began pulling strings, and diplomatic tensions between Briel and the empire escalated rapidly. Soon enough, things crumbled. The instability boiled over into chaos. One day, everything shattered. The kingdom's gates burned before Yuri's eyes. War erupted without mercy. It dragged on for years, grinding away at everyone. Blood soaked the earth, and the numbers of the dead became impossible to count. Fiore Brioli, the most feared man on the continent and Yuri's father, vanished without a trace during the height of war. That disappearance flipped the tides in the empire's favor. Yuri, tormented by the timing, became convinced that Yekaterina had betrayed him, passing secrets to the enemy. He wanted to believe he was wrong. He prayed she hadn't done it, but when he received a note from her apologizing, all hope dissolved. The note didn't mend anything. It only confirmed his suspicions and dragged him deeper into despair. Still, Yuri fought. He fought like a man with nothing left to lose. He cut down enemy after enemy, his blade drenched in blood. Eventually, exhaustion overtook him. He was surrounded by imperial knights, battered and bleeding. Accepting death, he waited for the final strike. But someone stepped in. A loyal knight named Laurent blocked the fatal blow with his own body. He shouted that Yuri had to escape. Yuri tried to argue, to stay, but Laurent's sacrifice forced him to flee, swallowing guilt with every step. A few days passed. The empire still hunted him. Yuri found a hiding place, but it wouldn't hold long. Hunger and despair gnawed at him. He was sure now, his father was dead too. Then, one of the empire's knights found him. Yuri didn't beg. He spoke with resignation, asking the knight to let him live, if only for the sake of his fallen family. The knight surprised him. He said the empire would suffer for its actions, and told Yuri to run, warning that others were closing in. So he ran again, gambling on survival. But deep down, he believed it was all pointless. Everyone he loved was gone. Sooner or later, another knight would find him and finish the job. And now here he was again, face to face with the dark figure, who told Yuri that death was a privilege he didn't deserve. That the weight of Briel's destruction belonged to him alone. The figure removed his mask, revealing a decayed, unholy face. Laurent. The knight who died for him was no longer a man, but something born of vengeance. Without hesitation, he plunged his sword into Yuri's chest. Pain exploded in his body, but it was the guilt that truly crushed him. In his final moments, Yuri remembered his father's words, "Never abandon your honor." As darkness consumed him, his thoughts spun out of control, until suddenly, light returned. He opened his eyes to find himself in a familiar room. His father was there, scolding him. The boy had been unconscious for 3 days, and the old man had stayed by his side the whole time. Confused, shaken, Yuri stared at his father. None of it made sense. He had just seen the man die. Now he was here, alive and worried. Yuri shrank back, struggling to grasp what was happening. He mumbled that it wasn't such a far-fetched ending after all, that even a man so full of honor had kept many secrets. His father, baffled by the nonsense, smacked him hard on the head. Yuri broke into tears. The blow hurt more than expected, and he cried out, asking why his father still hit so hard, even in hell. It was only then that he started to realize, maybe this wasn't hell. A leaf drifted by the window, catching his attention. The breeze, the vibrant world outside, the sound of his brothers bickering downstairs. It didn't match the image of hell. If this place was punishment, then where were the demons? Where were the echoes of his failures? Looking at his father, his siblings, and the life he thought he lost, the truth sank in. He collapsed again, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. His family called his name in panic. At that exact moment, The third prince of Brielle had returned to the age of 13. In his mind, he tried to rationalize it. A dream, maybe. Some warped final illusion of the dying mind. But it wouldn't end. Time moved forward. The world remained solid. The memories he'd forgotten started returning, piece by piece. That evening, he sat down to a normal dinner with his family. He said nothing. Just accepted what was in front of him. Somehow, impossibly, he had been thrown back to the past. Back to the spring of his 13th year, a second chance. The next morning, one of the maids came to wake him up. He had asked her to make sure he wasn't late, and yet he had overslept. Sword training was waiting. Panic set in. He jumped out of bed, begging Ina to hurry with his things. The maid suggested that he slow down, offering to help him wash his face first. She smiled like nothing had ever happened. But seeing her alive hit him like a dagger. In his past life, he had seen her body among the dead. The memory sent a chill through him. He turned to her, and out of nowhere, asked her to slap him. Ina froze, unable to respond. Her job was to serve and protect, not harm. Striking a noble, especially a prince, was treason. But Yuri insisted. He said it was an order. The maid, still troubled, asks Yuri if he's absolutely sure about what he's demanding. He begins to respond confidently, but before the words can finish forming, a loud slap explodes across his face. So sharp it sends birds scattering from the trees outside. For a moment, the absurdity strikes. If she had hit just a little harder, she might have killed him, and that would be the end of the story. The scene cuts to the training grounds. Yuri now stands with one side of his face puffed up like a bruised peach. He had forgotten just how strong Ina really was. She might be a maid, but her slap had warhead-grade impact. As he goes through his sword drills, even the bystanders can't help but laugh at his swollen face. No one offers sympathy. No ointment. Just raw entertainment. Everyone's having a good time at his expense. The worst part? Bernard, his sword instructor, doesn't even acknowledge the state of his face. No mention. Not even a grunt of concern. Instead, Bernard lets him spar. Without instruction, without correction, without care. No comments on Yuri's off-balance stance. No notes on his grip. Just silent clashes. It makes Yuri wonder how this man ended up as an instructor in the first place. Then it clicks. He remembers spying on a conversation between Bernard and his father years ago. Bernard had told the king that the boy was wasting his potential. He'd insisted that Yuri had the makings of a warrior, but no discipline to mold the skill. All the raw ability in the world meant nothing if he didn't take it seriously. It turns out, Bernard was a good teacher. Yuri was just a terrible student. In his past life, he'd brushed off the conversation, which only made him lazier. But now, remembering it with clarity, he feels nothing but regret. So this time, he approaches Bernard with firm resolve. He tells his instructor that from now on, he will train properly. No shortcuts, no whining, no distractions. He says he'll give his full effort from this day forward. Bernard raises an eyebrow and smirks, asking what brought on this sudden change. But beneath the sarcasm, he looks genuinely pleased. Then something shifts. Bernard releases a deep blue aura, announcing that the real training starts now. He bolts forward with lightning speed and brings down his blade against Yuri's with devastating force. Realizing he may not have explained himself clearly, Yuri panics. This guy might actually kill him. Bernard eventually returns to his stance while Yuri stands frozen, drenched in sweat. He had forgotten something vital. Bernard wasn't just a sword instructor. He was once known across the continent as the Sword Demon. And now, that same monster was walking straight at him with glowing eyes and enough killing intent to rupture steel. The prince's face says it all. Pure dread. His knees practically shake. After a relentless session, Yuri collapses onto the ground, gasping for air. He's broken, battered, and nearly dead, but alive. He just got a real taste of what training under a warrior like Bernard feels like. And yet, beneath the pain, there's a strange spark of hope. The only reason he managed to keep up was thanks to the battle-hardened instincts he carried from his previous life as a mercenary. Despite the brutality, he's improving faster than he imagined. What's even more surprising is Bernard's reaction. The instructor stares at him, astonished. He can't believe the kid managed to block every strike. Something had awakened inside the boy mid-fight, an unnatural growth rate, almost magical. Their session is interrupted when Ina storms in, breathless, calling for the young master. Both Yuri and Bernard turn, alarmed. She informs them that Count Johannes has arrived, with his son. Yuri's eyes go cold. The name alone is enough to set him on edge. God Barkvar. The same boy who would grow up to betray the kingdom and open the gates for the Empire's invasion. And now, here he is again. This time, Yuri has no intention of letting that mistake happen twice. With chilling calm, he asks Ina where the bastard is. The next scene moves to the dining hall. The family is gathered for a meal alongside their guests. Count Johannes notes the maturity in Yuri's behavior and compliments him. The king, amused, agrees and jokes that Yuri must be eating something new. Johannes laughs and says they should feed Got the same thing. The king returns the gesture, praising Got's intelligence, though his father seems less impressed, pointing out his son's many flaws. Meanwhile, Got is practically blushing while admiring Yuri's older brother, openly fangirling. Yuri, on the other hand, is locked in a silent death stare aimed right at Got. The boy quickly looks away, unnerved. Yuri's brother picks up on the tension, asking if something happened between them. Yuri casually responds that Got is the same kid who stabbed him in the back. His brother, ever the instigator, mocks him for letting someone like that walk free. He says that if someone betrayed him like that, he wouldn't hesitate to settle the score. Yuri admits that Got gets under his skin, pretending to be noble while lacking the backbone to back it up. Got's expression darkens. He glares back with equal fire, but Yuri doesn't rise to it. He remembers that acting rashly only plays into the hands of fate. If he's going to stop the fall of Brielle, he needs to be smart. He also recalls that, around this same time in the original timeline, a minor argument with Got may have been what led to the eventual betrayal. This time, he's going to handle things differently. Later, the two boys enter the training grounds. Yuri tosses a wooden stick to Got, calling out his potential with the sword. Got shrugs it off, saying he's not even close to becoming a knight. But Yuri tells him that it's his destiny, and whether he believes it or not, that path is coming for him. Before Got can form a response, Yuri launches forward and starts the duel. The legendary weapon. A humble stick. But in Yuri's hands, it might as well be a blade of legend. The sticks collide. Got shouts that he's a coward for starting without warning. Yuri doesn't care. He kicks a cloud of dirt into his opponent's face, blinding him. Got protests, reminding him of the code of honor that knights live by. Yuri's response. He drops the stick altogether. No weapons. Just fists. That alone says everything. I don't need a blade to win. He surges forward and delivers a vicious kick that sends Got flying. The kid crashes hard. The duel is over. Yuri stands over him, holding the stick like a scepter of judgment. He stares down at the traitor-to-be, remembering the shameful legacy this boy would leave behind. Then he speaks. He says that Got's father is a great man, a respected knight, and that kind of legacy means something. It creates pressure and expectations, but it also offers purpose. He offers Got a hand. He tells him that everyone wants to survive, but what he can't tolerate is someone weak-willed, especially someone destined to be a knight of Brielle. Not again. Not in this life. Yuri ends by asking a question. Why did Got's father become a count? He doesn't expect an answer. He simply tells the boy to carry that question with him. Think about it every time the world tries to break him. The tension dissolves as Got departs, surprisingly in good spirits. He thanks the Brielle family for their hospitality and leaves without incident. As the door closes behind him, Yuri's older brother raises a brow and says that he's honestly stunned by the outcome of the duel. He admits that he had secretly hoped Got would win, a statement that stings more than it should. Yuri immediately takes offense, but his brother doubles down, reminding him that, at this point in time, the third prince is known more for being a disaster than a warrior, an entitled gambler with a flair for chaos. It's not unfair, just honest. Yuri doesn't like hearing it, but he gets it. Still, he announces that things are going to be different. He says he's turning over a new leaf and warns his brother to stop teasing. His brother stares at him, baffled, mouth half open in disbelief. Yuri flashes a grin, clearly enjoying the confusion. Days pass. Training becomes Yuri's entire world. Each evening ends with him staggering back from the field, exhausted. Bernard shows no mercy. But as the sword becomes an extension of his will, Bernard decides it's time to move to the next step. Mana training. When the instructor brings it up, Yuri lights up with anticipation, asking if he'll be learning Bernard's personal method. But Bernard quickly douses that hope, stating bluntly that Yuri isn't ready. Instead, he insists the prince learn the Brielle Kingdom's official mana method. Yuri tries to hide his frustration. He already mastered that method in his past life. He knows it inside and out. There's nothing new to gain. He even reached its ceiling as a mercenary, nothing more to wring from it. Bernard notices the shift in his expression and asks if Yuri had something else in mind. After some thought, Yuri suggests that he'd rather be trained by someone else, specifically, a member of the Royal Guard. Not necessarily a master, but someone with natural potential, someone he can observe and grow alongside. He says there's still one technique he never managed to grasp in his last life. Bernard considers this. He closes his eyes, sifting through names, until one rises above the rest: Jared. That name hits Yuri like a jolt. He remembers the man. During the brutal years of war, Jared wasn't particularly impressive. In fact, he was more pathetic than promising. Undertrained, anxious, constantly on the edge of collapse. And yet, somehow, he survived. Back then, Jared had complained constantly, sometimes to Yuri himself. And still, Yuri suspects that underneath all that mess, Jared possessed something monstrous. Talent that had gone entirely untapped. Yuri realizes now that they had both wasted their gifts before the war tore their world apart. This time, he plans to do something about it. He decides to meet Jared in person and reawaken the talent that had gone dormant. The next scene shifts to the Royal Guard's training ground. Yuri walks in unannounced, prompting the senior knight, Sir Rosso, to ask what brings the third prince there. Yuri says he simply wanted to observe the knights, admire their efforts, and see how the Royal Academy is faring. The yard is alive with combat. Knights clash, bark instructions, sweat under the weight of their training. But when Yuri asks about Jared, the name alone causes Sir Rosso to hesitate. He points to a quiet corner of the grounds. Jared is there, training alone, if it can even be called that. The effort he's putting in is minimal, his form lackluster. Yuri lets out a sigh. He finally understands why Bernard looked so disappointed. Compared to the others, Jared is holding himself back. His routine is basic, barely stretching his abilities. No intensity. No ambition. At this rate, it's no wonder he ends up a washed-out knight in the grim future that Yuri remembers. Yuri turns to Sir Rosso and asks for a wooden sword. He says he wants to spar. Rosso lights up and asks who the prince would like to face. Without hesitation, Yuri points to Jared. Soon the courtyard quiets. The other trainees step back, giving space. Jared steps forward with visible reluctance. His fellow knights cheer him on, urging him to give it his best shot, but Jared just looks irritated, like he'd rather be anywhere else. Yuri steps into the ring and announces that he's heard of Jared's potential. He says that's why he's come, to test it for himself. Jared listens, unsettled by the seriousness in the prince's tone. The duel begins. Yuri lunges first, blade moving fast and sharp. Jared parries cleanly, without panic. Each step he takes is measured, his reactions precise. His peers watch in awe. He's far more capable than he appears. At the same time, Yuri's performance shocks the trainees too. For someone so young, his movements are far too refined. Every strike, every parry, calculated. Jared starts to feel it. This isn't a typical spar. This is a test. Yuri pushes forward, pressing the advantage. But he's not overexerting. His attacks are synced to Jared's pace, mimicking his energy. It's intentional. He's adapting in real time. The match drags. No flourish, no chaos. Just rhythm. Jared grows bored, confused by Yuri's restraint. Until, suddenly, the tempo shifts. Yuri crashes down with a crushing swing, heavy enough to knock the wind out of him. Even so, Jared blocks. The strength behind the swing surprises even him. Yuri acknowledges it silently. He says to himself that Jared's reflexes are frightening. But the fight isn't over. He whips his sword in a wide arc and pushes the knight back. Now, Jared starts to feel the pressure. Yuri's attacks are no longer accommodating. They're vicious, tactical. And for the first time, Jared stops holding back. He retaliates with his own force, and their swords clash with real tension. Yuri, panting, admits to himself that this was bound to happen. No matter how much knowledge he brings from his previous life, Jared is still a force of nature. Winning isn't even the goal, testing him is. But Yuri has one last move. He feints, then launches a sudden upward strike. Jared blocks, but the recoil is rough, leaving a gap. Yuri doesn't hesitate. He slashes through and lands a clean hit. The crowd gasps. Cheers follow. The prince, smiling, claims the hit proudly. Jared resets his stance. The match isn't over. Yuri questions aloud if he's still planning to hold back. Jared doesn't answer, but he's thinking hard. Even though he had control earlier, now it feels like he's reacting instead of leading. Driven by something deep and burning, Jared moves again. He barely dodges another strike. Yuri tells him to step up. Fight harder. Annoyed, Jared complies. In a flash, he channels mana into his blade, his weapon pulses with raw energy. Sir Rosso and the other knights shout warnings, telling him not to unleash such a technique against royalty. But Jared doesn't care, not now. His blade tears through the air, slicing just past Yuri's neck. A little closer and it would have been real damage. Jared's fury evaporates the moment he sees the damage he's caused. His blade hadn't just grazed Yuri. It had sliced a shallow cut across the prince's head, even taking a few strands of hair with it. The reality of it lands like a hammer. He had actually injured a royal. The knights watching immediately break into a panic. Jared is berated for being reckless, accused of losing control in the middle of a sparring session. Sir Rosso rushes over in alarm, asking Yuri if he's all right. The third prince, however, doesn't seem shaken at all. He simply treats it like part of the deal, an inevitable risk in any real fight. Yuri calmly wraps the cut with a strip of cloth, sealing the bleeding with a tight bandage. Then he motions to Jared, telling him that they aren't finished yet. He wants the match to continue. Without hesitation, he launches forward. Their swords clash again, and this time, Yuri drives the tempo. Each blow he delivers pushes Jared back, surprising the rookie knight with the sheer difference in energy. This wasn't the same lazy prince everyone gossiped about. This was someone relentless, precise, and worse, having fun. Jared starts comparing them in his mind. He thinks about how he's spent his days barely scraping through training while the prince, who should have every excuse to coast on his title, is fighting as if the world's watching. There's no fear in Yuri's eyes, only determination and, somehow, joy. With every clash, Yuri pushes harder. He's not just matching Jared now, he's adapting, refining. He's building momentum. For every ounce of effort Jared uses to defend, Yuri answers with 2 more to press the attack. The duel balances on a knife's edge. And yet, Jared can't calm himself. He's never felt this kind of pressure, not even from more advanced knights. This wasn't just sparring anymore, it was awakening. Yuri's expression is sharp, focused, his blue eyes locked on Jared's every move. When Jared charges, the prince meets him with a block, fluid and efficient. Then he retaliates with a horizontal strike that whooshes through the air. Jared ducks just in time, but not without cost. A few strands of his own hair flutter to the ground. Revenge, served poetic. Stung by the humiliation, Jared roars and lifts his blade with both hands. He slams it down using a burst of mana. A technique potent enough to crack Yuri's wooden sword clean in half. The match is over. Jared stands there panting, his aura flickering as it dies away. He looks ready to apologize, but Yuri smiles instead. He reaches out a hand, saying that he learned a lot from the battle. Jared hesitates, then accepts the handshake, acknowledging that the young prince's effort was no joke. Inwardly, the knight can't believe it. The fighting spirit in Yuri wasn't normal. It wasn't just pride or training, it was something raw, a kind of unfiltered will. In that brief clash, he'd seen the makings of a real warrior hidden in a noble's body. Jared is still processing it all when he realizes he's still holding the prince's hand. Yuri glares at him and asks why he's acting so casual, as if cutting a royal's head is just part of the job. Flustered, Jared stammers out something and flees the scene in a panic. Meanwhile, Yuri flops to the ground, absolutely drained. Even he has to admit that fight took everything out of him. Around him, the other knights break into cheers, praising the prince's resilience and skill. Their celebration is soon joined by a new presence. A man with sharp eyes and a calm stride steps onto the field. He bears a strong resemblance to Bernard, and he surveys the exhausted prince with curiosity. This is signed, Captain of the Royal Guard. And in that moment, he decides that Yuri might be worth watching. The scene fades and picks up again a few days later. Jared is finishing his shift when he hears a familiar voice call out to him. He turns and finds Yuri waiting casually by the path. The prince tells him they've got somewhere important to go. Jared hesitates, mentioning that skipping training might set him back. Yuri chuckles and says that's exactly why he needs to come, because he's finally taking training seriously. And, Yuri adds, he's the reason for that shift in mindset, so Jared owes him at least this. Knowing he can't really argue with the prince, Jared agrees. The two begin walking. Curious, Jared asks where they're heading. Yuri tells him to quit whining and keep up. Before Jared can respond, Yuri shouts ahead, calling to someone else. The figure turns. It's Hernando, the royal court mage. Startled by the prince's sudden entrance, he asks what the hell Yuri wants. The prince says that he needs his assistance for a small mission. Hernando scoffs and says he's busy and uninterested, until Yuri casually mentions that he knows about the mage's massive mountain of gambling debt, and that he's willing to pay it off. The mage freezes. He spins around, asking if Yuri is serious. The prince assures him he is. He says that despite his reputation in the gambling den, he doesn't lie, well, not outside of it anyway. Hernando, still skeptical, pulls out a detailed contract and demands the prince sign it. Yuri gapes in horror. Apparently, Even being the third prince isn't enough to get out of paperwork. Not one to go down easily, Yuri quickly pushes all the liability onto Jared, stating that the knight will act as the official witness to their agreement. Jared starts to protest, but then realizes Yuri's using him as a legal workaround to avoid binding himself to anything. Smart, if underhanded. With the contract settled, Hernando agrees to come along but says he still has no idea what the mission actually is. That's when Yuri finally drops the real plan. They're going to Sword Mountain. Hernando blinks in disbelief. He asks if Yuri's talking about that Sword Mountain. The one from the legends. Yuri smirks and says it's exactly that. He tells them they're going to loot the dungeon left behind by his ancestor. The group ventures through a long abandoned tunnel beneath the palace. Jared leads the way with his sword drawn. As they walk, Hernando mutters that he had no idea a secret passage like this even existed. Jared turns and asks what lies at the end of the path. Yuri shrugs like it's nothing, then says it leads directly into Sword Mountain. Jared freezes, stunned, and confirms that it's the legendary Sword Mountain. Yuri nods, then grows quiet as memories wash over him. In his past life, when Brielle fell, news had spread about a hidden dungeon inside Sword Mountain, uncovered only after the Empire seized control. He had fled through these tunnels during the chaos, unaware of what lay beneath. Now, this time, he refuses to repeat that mistake. He tells himself that he's going to uncover the truth behind his family's legacy. The tunnel eventually opens into a vibrant forest, dense greenery glowing with ethereal light, like something out of a fairy tale. Yuri pushes open the rusted iron doors, leading the group into the untouched wilderness. Hernando looks around and asks if this really is where the mountain begins. Then he shifts the topic, wondering how Yuri got the key. The prince mutters that it had been sitting in his study the whole time in his previous life, but he never knew its worth. He tells the mage to stop acting like a nosy old ant and focus. Suddenly, Hernando yelps in pain. A sharp thorn slices into his hand, and Yuri warns him that the leaves here are razor sharp. He tells him to quit whining and keep up. As they walk deeper, Hernando leans toward Jared and jokes that maybe Yuri hit his head recently. Jared agrees, saying the prince has been acting strange. Before they can continue their whispering, Yuri barks at them to move faster, proving that he hasn't lost his commanding tone. Then, he suddenly halts and signals for silence. He points ahead. A massive pack of direwolves is nestled among the trees, lean, silent, and dangerously alert. Yuri whispers that they move in packs, so more are likely nearby. Jared is shocked that the prince seems to know so much. Yuri casually says he read it in a book. Hernando nearly trips just from the mental image of Yuri voluntarily reading. But before they can laugh, the mage steps backward, and right onto the loudest twig in the entire forest. Snap. The sound echoes like a gunshot. Everyone freezes. Then, with a terrifying snarl, a direwolf lunges from the trees, fangs bared and aiming straight for Hernando's throat. Jared reacts in a flash. As soon as the direwolf lunges, he roars Yuri's name and charges forward, swinging his sword with lethal precision. The blade slices clean through the beast's neck in a single devastating stroke. The wolf's head hits the ground a moment before its body crumples beside a frozen Hernando. Yuri, impressed, commends Jared's use of mana, pointing out that direwolf hide is practically iron wrought. But there's no time for praise. From deeper in the woods, a low, guttural howl tears through the trees. The alpha emerges, twice the size of the others, muscles rippling beneath scarred fur, eyes locked on Jared like he just found his next meal. The pack responds instantly. One moment of silence, then chaos. The wolves surround them in a blink, snarling, frothing at the mouth, circling like shadows preparing for a feast. Jared tightens his grip and commands the others to stay close as he channels mana once more. The wolves launch as one. But Jared doesn't falter. With eyes sharp and movements sharper, he slices into them like a storm made of steel. Each blow lands clean, his footwork fluid. Even Hernando, half hiding behind a tree, comments on the sheer elegance of the knight's technique. Yuri agrees. Jared's form is commendable, but he notes to himself that the knight's growth still has a long way to go. As more wolves pour in, Jared begins to lose ground. That's when Yuri elbows Hernando and says it's time the so-called battle mage put those highly advertised skills to use. Hernando rolls his eyes and mutters that the prince is definitely pushing his limits, then waves his hands dramatically to conjure a barrage of fireballs. At least 100 of them swirling into formation like an armada of flaming meteors. Jared, dodging claws and teeth, throws a confused glance back and asks what's happening, only to spot one fireball headed straight toward him. He leaps aside just in time as it explodes with bone-shattering force, vaporizing a chunk of the pack and turning the forest floor to cinders. Hours pass. Exhausted, bloodied, and bruised from relentless combat with every monster the wild could throw at them, the group finally reaches the peak of Sword Mountain. Jared collapses near the cliff's edge, panting hard and muttering complaints about the trip being more of a death march. He eyes the empty plateau suspiciously and asks if this desolate rock is really the place they've been seeking. Yuri, without hesitation, replies that it absolutely is. He begins examining the area with a veteran's eye, pacing until something catches his attention, a glint behind a rock. His eyes light up, and without waiting, he dives into the dirt to dig it out. Jared rushes over and scolds him, insisting that royalty shouldn't do grunt work. He tries to call Hernando over to help, but the mage grimaces in offense, calling physical labor a disgrace to his noble art. Eventually, the sword is unearthed, gleaming, ancient, yet oddly untouched by time. Yuri holds it up, awestruck. It looks ceremonial, valuable, and untouched by rust. Hernando squints at it and mutters that it doesn't look centuries old, it looks like someone left it there recently. Curious, Yuri inspects the hilt more closely and sees the word guilty etched into the base. Jared approaches, asking if this is truly the legacy they came for. Yuri isn't sure. His grip on the blade tightens. That's when the ground begins to tremble beneath them. Before anyone can react, the mountain splits open with a rumble, and the earth gives way. Jared screams like a tragic actor as all three plunge into the abyss below. They fall. And fall. Eventually, they crash land. Hard. Jared groans beneath the prince, having shielded Yuri during the fall. Yuri climbs off and comments that the knight must have reinforced his body with mana, calling it impressive. Jared tries to mutter a reply, then immediately blacks out from sheer exhaustion. Moments later, Hernando floats down gently, arms out like a smug sorcerer on vacation. He lands with barely a thud and remarks that the chasm was deeper than expected. Yuri glares at him and mumbles that saving his own skin clearly mattered more than protecting the prince, which Hernando denies, though not convincingly. Before he can explain, a strange sound echoes from the dark tunnel ahead. Hernando's face drops as he spots something approaching. He spins toward Yuri and, in rising panic, says that something cursed is crawling toward them. Yuri accuses him of just trying to change the subject, but Hernando swears he's not joking, he's dead serious. The creeping figure becomes clear. Clad in cracked armor, eyes glowing with undead fury, a death knight steps out of the shadows. Yuri's blood runs cold. He immediately recognizes the creature. It's a Withit, a knight reborn through necromantic power, stronger than they ever were in life. Yuri shouts for Jared to wake up, but the knight only groans. A swift kick gets the job done. Jared shoots up and, upon spotting the death knight, throws himself in front of the prince and declares he'll handle it. Yuri raises an eyebrow, unimpressed by the sudden dramatic sacrifice. The death knight stops just short of them. Yuri studies it carefully, recalling that these undead were once loyal knights, resurrected by dark magic. But something feels different. This one isn't attacking. Despite Jared's protests, Yuri steps forward slowly. He says that if this is truly a guardian of the founders, it wouldn't strike a blood heir unprovoked. He announces his full name confidently. The death knight doesn't react at first, then slowly draws its blade. Jared and Hernando panic. The blade rises, and then plunges down, straight into the earth, taking a few hairs off Yuri's head. Hernando gasps and wails that the prince has been scalped. Yuri tells him to shut it while checking the top of his head. The knight finally speaks, saying Yuri carries the same arrogance as the last one. Sheathing his weapon, the death knight introduces himself as Eric Briel. The name hits like thunder. Jared gasps. Hernando stares in disbelief and explains that this is the Eric Briel, the war god of legend, the founder of the kingdom, the conqueror of the continent. Yuri straightens up. He asks if he's the first to reach this place. Eric confirms it, adding that only a true heir can draw the sword they found. That settles it. The blade really is the ancestral treasure. Yuri brings it closer to examine it again. Eric casually remarks that he used it once himself, which kills Yuri's excitement slightly. He mutters an apology for stealing the man's property. Eric responds in a more serious tone, asking what brought Yuri here. Yuri tightens his hold on the blade and declares his full name once more. He demands that the founder hand over his legacy. The death knight goes silent, then turns toward a glowing crystal embedded deeper in the chamber. With a heavy voice, he proclaims that the time has come and that he will fulfill his duty. He gestures for Yuri to follow. Yuri steps forward, sweat trickling down his back. Behind him, Jared stares blankly, trying to make sense of everything. One thing is certain. Being a royal guard is way more complicated than he ever signed up for. Yuri glanced back, shouting at Jared to snap out of whatever bizarre state he'd fallen into. The knight flinched as if waking from a dream, eyes wide, breath hitching. Something in him stirred. Images of memories that didn't belong to him, echoes from a past he hadn't lived. Confused, he scratched his head and muttered that he might be losing his mind. But he yelled that he was coming, and broke into a sprint after the prince. Ahead, the Death Knight approached the crystal, his joints groaning like ancient doors as he lowered himself onto its pedestal. The aura around him thickened, pressing into the air like gravity itself. He declared in a voice that boomed through the cavern that he hoped Yuri was truly worthy. The crystal ignited with a searing glow. Everyone shielded their eyes as light engulfed the chamber. Then, silence. Yuri opened his eyes to find himself in a desolate landscape, dry, cracked earth stretching endlessly, and a burning horizon that never seemed to move. He spun in place, disoriented, wondering aloud where the hell he'd landed. In the distance, a figure moved toward him. For a heartbeat, hope sparked. It could be the founder. But that spark vanished instantly as the thing closed in. It wasn't human. Not even close. It charged at him, sword raised high, blue light pulsing from an orb embedded in its chest. Yuri barely blocked the first strike and grunted from the force. He caught a better look. The orb in its chest pulsed in rhythm with its movements. As mana surged through the figure's transparent body, it funneled into its sword, lighting the weapon with eerie intensity. Then, it gestured, not to attack, but to demonstrate. Yuri blinked. He asked in disbelief if this strange being seriously expected him to copy its movements mid-fight. He muttered to himself that if this was the founder's training method, then maybe the guy had gone completely mad before dying. Still, as ridiculous as it seemed, the concept made a strange kind of sense. Forcing someone unfamiliar with mana techniques into a deathmatch just to teach them. Only someone with the privilege of a second life could think up something that unhinged. And maybe that someone was him. Yuri crouched low, focusing his energy into his palm. A soft glow responded. Mana. Real and alive in his grasp. He stared at the flicker of light, trying to piece together what the being was showing him. He raised his blade and called out, saying he still didn't fully get it. He asked for another demonstration. The being grinned, lifted its blade, and moved. And in that moment, something clicked. Yuri realized there was no escape from this trial. Not if he wanted to be strong enough to change fate. If the Empire was destined to reveal its true face and come for Brielle again, then this time, things would be different. He swore to himself. No more failures. No more regrets. Even if it cost him everything. He muttered that this was it, the swordsmanship of the Ancestor King. Then, with resolve solidified, Yuri dashed forward like lightning, striking with everything he had. He vowed to absorb every motion, every ounce of skill, and battle the faceless warrior with his entire soul. Elsewhere, Jared's eyes snapped open. He stood alone in a massive, unfamiliar space, a stone arena that echoed with silence. It resembled a training ground, but something felt off. Too real to be a dream. He scanned the area, tense, sword in hand, demanding that whatever was hiding come out and face him. Footsteps answered. He turned, and froze. Standing across from him was a perfect replica of himself. Jared furrowed his brow and asked if this was the Death Knight's idea of a joke. He asked the copy its name and whether it was supposed to be him. The doppelganger smirked and replied that he should stop fighting fate. It asked if Jared hadn't joined the Royal Guards just for an easy ride, money, recognition, safety. It warned that the more he clung to the third prince's side, the more miserable he would become. Jared narrowed his eyes and listened quietly. Then, slowly, he looked down at his blade. He admitted to himself that maybe, in the past, that version of him would have agreed with all of it. But not anymore. His thoughts drifted to Yuri. Their duels, their progress. A grin broke across his face. He called the clone out for being bitter and muttered something poetic about blades. Once you swing one, the only thing that matters is the next. Looking back would only screw everything up. The fake Jared flared with mana and called him arrogant. With a burst of speed, it lunged forward. Jared blocked effortlessly. The rhythm was predictable. As their swords met again and again, Jared could tell, this copy never took risks. It was all reaction, no instinct. He saw through every step. When the clone leapt for a dramatic strike, Jared was already waiting. He slammed a clean counter, sending his mirror image tumbling. But the fight wasn't over. The copy began to melt, its form liquefying into a grotesque mass. Jared stepped back, sword ready, as it twisted and expanded into a sludge-like monster. He muttered that it was just another oversized brute inside, praying that Yuri was doing all right. Back in the desert, dust and broken rock littered the battlefield. Craters marked where blades had clashed. Yuri lay motionless in the center of one, chest rising slowly. The faceless fighter stepped toward him, blade glowing ominously. Still, Yuri didn't move. Without a word, the being raised its sword and brought it down with force. The instant before it connected, Yuri's eyes shot open. He flooded his weapon with mana and countered with a thrust so fast it ignited the air around him. The impact unleashed a shockwave of energy that sent the enemy skidding back, its steps light and balanced. Yuri exhaled, his chest heaving. He didn't know how long the duel had raged on, but something was changing. That last attack. It had been desperate, reckless, and almost suicidal. But it worked. The way mana surged through his body, the way he swung with full clarity, it all started to click. He looked at his blade, now pulsing with life. A breakthrough. Something real. Then, he noticed it. The transparent being's blade cracked. Fine lines spread across its surface. Its body trembled and began to crumble. Fragments flaked off like ash in the wind. Its time was up. Just before fading, the warrior lifted one arm in a final salute, one last wave of respect, and then, it was gone. Yuri watched the last fragments of the faceless warrior scatter into the air like glowing embers, a faint, almost wistful smile forming on his lips. He closed his eyes and offered a quiet thanks to the strange, silent mentor who had just tested him harder than anyone ever had. As the battlefield around him began to fade, his body started dissolving as well, pulled back from the realm of the trial. Moments later, he stirred with a groan, his senses fuzzy as he blinked the haze from his eyes. Around him, the others were waking too. Disoriented, dazed, and clearly having endured something similar. That's when it hit him. They were back. The chamber of the crystal returned into view, dimly lit with eerie calm. The Death Knight stood unmoving, and then chuckled, his voice dry and smug. He remarked that it looked like the group enjoyed their little dream. Yuri, still shaking off the mental weight of the trial, asked what exactly that experience was. The knight explained that it had all been part of the founder's design, his final contingency, crafted and left behind in the hopes that a true descendant of Briel would one day reach this place. Yuri's gaze darkened slightly. In his past life, Sword Mountain had been reduced to rubble by the Empire's forces. The legacy now within reach had been buried, lost forever in that timeline. No wonder no one in the royal line had ever come close to it before. Still not satisfied, he asked whether the founder himself used the mana method he had just witnessed. But the knight shook his head. The founder never used it himself. Instead, after traveling the world, he collected and refined every technique he deemed worthy and combined them into one final form, his legacy. And now, Yuri was the first to inherit it. Yuri looked thoughtful, even cautious, as he questioned why the founder hadn't just passed it down directly through the royal bloodline. The Death Knight answered that the dungeon only revealed itself when the time was right. If it had opened now, it meant that moment had finally come. As for what the timing signified, the knight made it clear, it wasn't his place to say. That answer, he said, Yuri would have to find on his own. The prince's eyes drifted toward the sword in his grip again, the weight of it unfamiliar and yet entirely his. He asked for its name. The Death Knight responded. Soul Severance. The name echoed in Yuri's mind with gravity, but before he could reflect further, the knight's aura flared. He stepped forward and instructed Yuri to kneel. There was no room for debate in his tone. Yuri, sensing the weight of the moment, dropped to one knee without hesitation. The knight placed a heavy, cold hand on Yuri's head and began the vow. He ordered the prince to never fear his enemies. Yuri replied firmly that he would not. The knight continued, commanding him to always follow his beliefs and to carry out Briel's duty to the bitter end. Then, his grip tightened, pulling Yuri's head back slightly as his voice deepened. He delivered the final truth. Briel never discards its honor, even if it means death. As the vow concluded, the knight began to fade, his form disintegrating into ash and mist. His final words whispered through the chamber, that this was the oath of Briel. Yuri remained silent, still kneeling, watching as the figure vanished completely, his thoughts heavy, his heart changed. The next morning, sunlight pierced through the windows as the maid burst into his room and threw open the curtains. She called out that it was already morning and asked if he was feeling all right, noting that he returned incredibly late the night before. She warned him not to fall back asleep or he'd miss his next appointment. From under the covers, Yuri groaned and stretched. He explained, half yawning, that he had stopped by the royal archives. The maid raised a brow and asked why, and Yuri said he'd been digging through some family records. While looking through the archive, Yuri had found something strange, a forgotten record. It spoke of the founder's brother, a man who rejected his family's honor and disappeared from history. Staring now at Soul Severance resting beside him, Yuri mused that the Death Knight had to be that missing sibling, and that this blade was originally his. The maid interrupted his thoughts, reminding him to get dressed quickly. The king, she added, was waiting for him. Yuri's stomach dropped. She added, with a bit of sympathy, that she wasn't sure what happened exactly, but after Hernando's meeting with His Majesty, the king immediately called for Yuri. At that, the prince nearly choked. He cursed Hernando in his head as memories of the dungeon returned, especially the mage's smug face telling him he was definitely reporting every last detail to the king. Yuri had pleaded that it wasn't necessary, but Hernando had said it felt extremely necessary. Inside the Grand Royal Hall, Yuri stood stiff beneath a chandelier so large it could bankrupt a kingdom. He announced his presence, and the king, seated at the far end, rubbed his forehead in frustration, clearly unsure where to begin. The king said that Hernando had told him everything. Yuri, already guilty, admitted it was all true. The king scolded him sharply for sneaking off without permission and, more seriously, for discovering the founder's hidden dungeon and retrieving the ancestral weapon. When he asked if it was true that Yuri had brought back the founder's legacy, the prince simply nodded. His Majesty rose, walking slowly toward him. His voice changed, deeper, more intense. He said he'd heard that Yuri had changed recently. He began listing names: Bernard, Jared, Ina, even the knights, and finally Hernando, all confirming the same story. Yuri wasn't the same boy anymore. He placed a hand on his son's head and demanded to know why. What happened to cause this transformation? Yuri swallowed, his hand tightening on the sword. The king repeated his question. Did the boy have nothing to say? Yuri stammered that he did. It was just hard to explain. The king, frowning, asked why he was hesitating. The prince looked down and admitted that it was because His Majesty was clenching his fist the whole time. Realizing this, the king relaxed his hand and told him to speak freely. Yuri exhaled. He said that it had started with a dream. The word caught the king's attention. Yuri continued. He said that in the dream, he had committed an unforgivable sin. The king repeated the phrase slowly, then, using Yuri's full name, demanded to know what that sin was. Looking him directly in the eye, Yuri said it: he failed to protect Briol. He described the vision: the kingdom falling to war, the people slaughtered, the streets soaked in blood. He said he tried to fight back, but it wasn't enough. When Briol fell, he ran. He lived in disgrace, stripped of honor, dying alone and broken. He clutched his chest and added that when he awoke from that dream, the necklace his mother had given him was gone. So maybe it wasn't a dream at all. Maybe it was a warning. A message from her. The king's expression shifts subtly, disturbed, yet composed. He leans forward and asks Yuri what force was responsible for Briol's destruction in this so-called dream. Internally, Yuri panics. It's far too early to bring up the empire. There's still a chance, however small, that with the right timing and choices, the inevitable war can be delayed, or avoided entirely. So he plays it safe. He tells his father that the invaders were cloaked in darkness, a black army from nowhere, without banners or names. The king lets out a quiet breath, his stern gaze softening as he remarks that it was probably nothing more than a nightmare, a bad dream, maybe even a message from Yuri's late mother. But still, he says he's glad the prince is finally starting to grow up. Yuri doesn't argue, though his thoughts say otherwise. He knows exactly what he's fighting for. It's not growth. It's redemption. He's trying to earn forgiveness for the sin of abandoning Briol when it needed him most. But his reflection is cut short when the king straightens and says there's still unfinished business. With arms folded, he commands Yuri to draw his sword. The air thickens. Fury Briol, the legend, the monster with a blade, was once the sword's equivalent of a natural disaster. A man born to destroy, to dominate, to leave his mark carved deep across the continent. He had made it onto the top 10 strongest list in the world at a time when even earning a place on that list meant surviving legends. And now, Yuri stood across from him in the king's personal training hall, a place he had never once set foot in before. He whispered to himself that this was hallowed ground, a place meant for warriors, not children. Fury calmly said he never expected any of his sons to be worthy of entering it. Yuri muttered back that he did have talent. The king exhaled slowly, repeating the word talent with thinly veiled disappointment. Then, without warning, he raised his blade and pointed it straight at Yuri's throat. The prince froze. Fury began listing the usual ingredients of a swordsman: speed, reflexes, instinct, and then posed the question: do those things make someone the greatest? Before Yuri could reply, he answered it himself. They don't. It's not about physical gifts. It's about the one thing deeper than duty, heavier than pride. The will that drives a warrior to surpass every limit. His eyes sharpened, and then something shifted. The glow in them turned red. Yuri flinched. The air changed. The presence that Fury now exuded was something primal. Terrifying. It felt like facing death itself. The king lowered his sword and said that the sensation, the presence, it didn't have a name. So he just called it the sword's calling. Yuri blinked, confused. Was that supposed to mean destiny? Fury nodded faintly and closed his eyes. Yuri's mind started to spin. In his past life, he had never been destined for the sword. He was never chosen. Yet now, here he was. Holding soul severance, standing in a hall that once terrified him, and facing the greatest swordsman alive. Fiore's voice cut through his thoughts. He asked whether Yuri should even be holding that blade. Could he hear its call? And more importantly, would he still carry it even when staring death in the eye? Yuri stuttered. He said he didn't feel anything, not really. But Fiore's eyes turned colder, and the pressure around Yuri intensified. He backed away instinctively, legs shaky. Then came the memories. Like floodgates bursting open, images of war consumed his mind. Screams from comrades. Fire everywhere. Voices begging him to run. People dying around him. Civilians torn apart. The smell of burning flesh and the taste of smoke choking his lungs. Suddenly, he was back in the nightmare. No, the memory. Brielle was burning again. Empire banners swarmed through the streets. The body of Hernando was stomped beneath enemy boots. A soldier pointed at him and shouted, calling him by title, the last prince of Brielle. Yuri looked at his hands and saw them trembling. It was real. He was back in that moment, back where he failed. Enemy blades flashed. One lunged for him, but his instincts took over. He blocked, countered, and sliced. The attacker fell, but there were more. Always more. His men shouted for him to escape. They tried to hold the line, sacrificing themselves to buy seconds of his survival. And one by one, they died. It was chaos. Pain. Cowardice. Rage. Guilt. He questioned whether this was the fate of Brielle. One that would never change. Trapped in helplessness. Condemned to repeat failure. But something inside cracked wide open. The flames licked the sky. The streets were rivers of ash and blood. And Yuri, the last prince, stood among it all, sword drawn, eyes wild. The enemy came for him again, convinced this was their chance to end Brielle once and for all. But Yuri's grip on his blade didn't loosen. His knees didn't shake. Not anymore. He had made a vow. He would never fear his enemy again. As the Imperial troops swarmed, he met them head-on. His blade tore through armor and bone, cutting a path of destruction. Blood blinded him, yet he pressed forward. A spear grazed his cheek. He didn't flinch. He caught the shaft with his bare hand and drove his sword into the attacker's gut. Someone shouted that it was over for him, that death was near. But Yuri roared back with defiance. He screamed that Brielle would never throw away its honor, not even in death. And then, with fury surging in his veins, he lunged forward like a beast unchained, vowing to carve their graves himself. From somewhere distant, the voice of a child whispered a promise. He said he would protect Brielle's honor, no matter what. Fiore's voice broke through like a blade through fog, calling out to him. Loud, grounding. Yuri gasped and jolted upright. He stood in the training hall once more, the illusion gone. His father stood in front of him, eyes steadier now. The nightmare had ended, but sweat dripped from Yuri's face, and the tremble in his limbs betrayed the intensity of what he'd just relived. Fury told him that what he experienced was no ordinary vision. The sword triggered something deep, a scar in the soul. He said that the sword reveals truths, and sometimes, memories not yet lived. Yuri looked up at him, shaken but steady. He said he understood now. He was ready. Then he paused, realizing his father was staring at him strangely, almost mournfully. The boy tugged on his father's sleeve and asked him to relax. Fury blinked, caught completely off guard. Yuri grinned and declared he was a genius. Fury twitched, then smacked him lightly across the head. Later that morning, under the warm brush of wind and sunlight, Bernard strolled past and spotted the young prince icing a bump on his head. He raised an eyebrow and asked whose bright idea that was. Yuri casually answered that it was his dad. Bernard chuckled, saying Fury must be in a good mood today. But he warned the prince, training would be different from now on. No more soft handling. Yuri said he was ready for that. Then, curiosity got the better of him. He asked Bernard whether his decision to stay in Brielle had anything to do with a duel with his father. Bernard confirmed it immediately. It had been a condition, one that nearly killed him. Yuri pressed further. If not for that condition, would he have stayed? Bernard replied with a flat no. Yuri called him heartless. Bernard laughed. But both of them knew the real meaning behind the question. Yuri wasn't just asking about the past, he was asking Bernard to stay, for the future. Bernard strokes his chin with a smirk and says that he might consider staying, if Yuri can give him a good enough reason. Anything with a hint of temptation will do, he adds, because these old bones are always looking for a fresh excuse to ignore responsibilities. Yuri freezes up a bit as Bernard suddenly shifts tone and asks him dead on whether he truly wants to pursue swordsmanship. The question hits deeper than expected. Yuri's not sure how to respond, and Bernard, catching the hesitation, tilts his head, clearly scheming something. The look in his eyes says he's testing the kid. He's curious, really curious, to see what the boy will do. Yuri admits to himself that it's intimidating. Bernard isn't just some instructor, he's a monster of a man known as the Sword Demon, a name drenched in blood and whispered in war stories. But Bernard waves it off, telling him it's okay if he hasn't mastered anything yet. He'll work with that. Still uncertain, Yuri says it probably won't help much, but he steps forward anyway. With quiet resolve, he draws his blade and begins to demonstrate. Mana flows through the steel, not merely enhancing the strikes but becoming one with the sword itself. Bernard watches with furrowed brows. This isn't technique, it's something else entirely. He admits he's never seen anything like it. Normally, mana is used to strengthen swordsmanship, not merge into the weapon's core like it's alive. Yuri explains that's exactly the issue. This method is near impossible to pass on. Every time someone tries, it becomes fractured, incomplete. But Bernard shrugs again. He says that's fine. Even incomplete, it's worth learning. He adds that he'll make it the condition. If Yuri shares this method with him, then Bernard will stay in Brielle. No strings attached. That blunt confidence surprises Yuri. The old man speaks like he already knows he'll understand it. Yuri nods and accepts the terms. The deal is made. Bernard is officially staying in Brielle, and it feels real this time. With a sudden gleam in his eye, Bernard tells him to show more, right now. He takes position. Yuri, gripping his blade, steadies himself and channels the technique. Simhansham. The movement is fluid, controlled, flowing like a wave guided by raw instinct and mana. In the middle of it, Bernard casually drops a bombshell. He never planned to leave Brielle to begin with. Yuri's sword halts midair. He stares at the old man in disbelief. Bernard goes on to say that the king already asked him to stay for another 10 years. It was settled. Yuri's face falls. He realizes he just got played like a fiddle. Bernard chuckles and reminds him he's supposed to be attacking. Yuri doesn't need another nudge. Irritated but focused, he charges forward. Their blades collide, sparks flying as steel meets steel. Later that night, Yuri lies in bed staring at the ceiling, his thoughts racing. The future feels different now. Not the doomed one from his past life where Brielle burned because of his cowardice. No massive victory has been won yet. No battles turned. And yet, Bernard choosing to stay is enough to prove something's changing. It's subtle, slow, but the future is bending. Still, he knows it's not nearly enough. He thinks of the Empire. Of what they did. Of what they will do. He promises himself again that he'll bring them to their knees. Just then, Ina appears, stepping into his room with a look that says she's expecting trouble. She asks if he's planning to stir anything else up. Yuri raises a brow and asks if she's hiding something. She sighs, clearly used to his nonsense, and says that he always has some excuse when he wants her help. Then, without missing a beat, she brings up the Elders' Council meeting scheduled for tomorrow. She warns him not to pretend he forgot. The boy sits up straight, eyes wide. That part is definitely new. Ina reminds him it's first thing in the morning and that most of the council will be present. Then, taking his hand and smiling way too brightly, she says the place will be full of scary old men and begs him not to punch anyone this time. Yuri forces out a nervous laugh. He assures her he'll behave. He's not that kid anymore. The next morning, the council chamber feels like walking into a trap. The atmosphere is thick with skepticism. Just like Ina warned. Duke Gennard is the first to speak, immediately dragging attention toward the prince's mana method. He strongly opposes it, claiming it's unproven, unstable, and dangerous. This meeting, meant to be a place for national discussion, has devolved into an ambush targeting Yuri's legitimacy. Now he sees why his father always avoided these people. The Duke insists Yuri should stick with the traditional Brielle method, calling it tried and true. Another royal council member stands and fires back, stating that the technique is actually the founder's legacy. Gennard demands proof. Tempers flare. The council member defending Yuri grows visibly annoyed, saying that it's not about proof but belief. That this is a bloodline inheritance. Gennard dismisses that as sentiment, not strategy. He says their concern is the prince's safety, and that everyone here only wants what's best for the kingdom. Yuri, watching this back and forth, almost finds it amusing. The same man who, in his past life, bowed to the empire without a fight, is now shouting about safety like he cares. The irony is thick enough to choke on. Gennard then turns to Synod, the captain of the royal guard. He asks for his take. Synod, trying to stay neutral, gives a careful answer. He says every mana method has strengths and weaknesses, and every individual has their own affinity. Not every method works for every knight. Gennard latches onto that immediately. He says if even the royal guard isn't convinced, that's enough reason to shut the entire thing down. The logic is weak, but the momentum is shifting in his favor. The royal council chamber grows heavier with tension as a royal member steps up to counter Duke Gennard's argument. He says that Captain Saynad's point was about each mana method having its own value, nothing more, nothing less. Gennard's lackey quickly joins in, trying to spin the conversation. He claims the Duke is only looking out for the prince's well-being, worried that using an unstable technique might harm him. Yuri feels the shift instantly. The tone in the room has changed, and not in his favor. What started as a subtle pushback has turned into open resistance. In a matter of minutes, he's found himself isolated in the center of the debate. If he hadn't already anchored Simonkim into his core, they'd be forcing him to rebuild from the ground up. But he stayed true to the founder's original vision, and that technique is now part of him. Even so, he finds himself frozen, unsure what to say as dozens of eyes burn holes into him. The weight of their judgment is suffocating. Just then, a voice slices through the silence, casual yet cutting, mocking how impressive the council is at talking without actually doing anything. Every head turns as a man steps forward. Baron Calcio Urantia, smirking like he just wandered into a tavern brawl and couldn't be happier. He throws out a question to the room, asking who among them has ever fought an orc. The question lands like a thrown dagger. Blunt, direct, and unsettling. A few nobles whisper. Duke Gennard squints, clearly offended, and demands to know who this man even is and why he's speaking. Calcio introduces himself without flinching. A free baron, one without ties to a central domain. Gennard's expression darkens, as if personally insulted that someone of such low rank dares step into this hall. Calcio shrugs and explains that he didn't want to be here either. But Count Sitter personally ordered him to attend. Yuri's eyebrows shoot up. Count Sitter, Lord of the Borderlands. A war-forged commander, legendary for keeping the Empire and its monsters at bay. A man who lived by the sword and rarely wasted time on politics. For him to send someone here? That's no small thing. Another royal member asks the obvious. Why would Count Sitter send a free baron to this meeting? With a grin, Calcio says the Count wanted someone to witness the council of politicians patting themselves on the back. And now, seeing it in person, he admits it all makes perfect sense. But then his voice shifts, dropping the sarcasm. He explains that on the battlefield, mana method doesn't matter. Whether you wield the Empire's Lionfang technique or Briel's ancient style, what truly counts is the warrior. He turns toward Yuri and asks what he believes. Yuri takes the opening. He steps forward, voice steady, and states that he's choosing to pursue the founder's method. It's not just a technique, it's part of Briel's soul. And he doesn't understand why that decision is causing so much resistance. He makes his stance clear. No matter the opposition, he's going to master Simonkim. Calcio nods and tells the council that the prince is doing exactly what they all should be, honoring the legacy of the kingdom. He adds that many of the people in this room have neither the weight nor the right to speak on the matter, especially when they've never stepped beyond the walls of the capital. He makes a point to jab the aristocrats glued to their embroidered chairs, saying that until they've stood ankle-deep in blood on a battlefield, their opinions are just noise. Gennard scoffs and says Calcio is blunt to the point of being disrespectful. Calcio shrugs again and says that killing orcs tends to strip the polish off a man's words. He circles back to his question. Who in this room has actually slain an orc? The room falls dead silent. He presses further. Monsters don't care what technique you're using when they sink their teeth into you. Mana philosophy doesn't matter in the middle of a battlefield. Gennard's sidekick tries to pivot, saying Calcio has a point, but reminds everyone that Yuri is still just a boy and might lack the judgment to make such a weighty decision. Yuri doesn't let that slide. He stares the man down and asks if he's seriously questioning his judgment after everything that's happened. He adds that his mana method can't be dismantled on a whim. It's a core forged through blood, sweat, and choice. Calcio backs him immediately, saying Yuri isn't the type to crumble. Then he asks the real question. Are these noblemen actually suggesting they rip out a prince's core? Is that where this discussion is headed? The sidekick's anger rises, but Calcio doesn't flinch. He calmly points out how ridiculous the whole conversation has become. Meanwhile, Yuri flashes Calcio a look of gratitude. He didn't expect support. But now, in this room of vultures, at least one hawk is circling in his favor. Calcio puts it plainly. If they're trying to help the prince, wasting hours on semantic arguments isn't the way. Brielle doesn't have the luxury of spinning its wheels in noble games while real threats close in. That's the final straw for Duke Gennard. He lashes back, accusing the border territories of draining the kingdom's resources and giving nothing in return. It's clear he's snapping from the blow to his pride. Calcio's smile disappears. His voice cuts colder now. He asks if the council only starts paying attention once 100 people die. He says that while these nobles sip wine, soldiers are dying on the borders every day. He doesn't speak in hypotheticals. He says that on the very morning he left the frontier, 4 soldiers were killed. One of them was a man he'd shared breakfast with. He says he buried him with his own hands. The room falls quiet again. Then Calcio drops the truth. Orcs don't rest. They're bred for violence, built for war. And right now, they're moving. Yuri's eyes narrow. A memory stirs. Back when tensions between Brielle and the Klein Duchy flared, the orcs had seized that instability as an opening to invade. He asks Calcio if something similar is happening now. Calcio confirms it. The border isn't just tense, it's boiling. Yuri then asks whether Klein's troops have been sighted. Calcio says the border guard mysteriously withdrew. In their place? Burned villages. Missing civilians. Widespread slaughter. Yuri feels the full weight of the situation settle in. This isn't some border skirmish. This is something bigger. Maybe even betrayal. And Duke Gennard's third son. Yuri can't help but wonder if the man made a critical mistake, or worse, struck a deal behind closed doors. The chamber stays silent. The air thick with fear, with implication. No one says a word. Then Yuri stands. With quiet authority, he ends the meeting and walks away. There's nothing left to discuss. Duke Gennard tries to cut in, his pride clearly bruised, but Yuri doesn't give him the chance. He shuts the man down with a cold stare and says that if the council wants to argue over mana methods while soldiers die at the border, then they've already failed Brielle. He tells them bluntly they'd be better off redirecting their energy toward real threats. Like fortifying defenses against the Duchy of Klein and the growing orc incursions. His words land like a slap across the chamber. Every self-indulgent noble in the room feels the sting. News of the third prince's confrontation with the Elders' Council travels fast. Count Sitter, stationed at the border, listens closely as Calcio Arantia recounts the events. When asked for a personal impression, Calcio says that the prince didn't look like a boy anymore. There was something in his eyes. Something steady. Sitter processes the words, then calmly tells Calcio to keep an eye on Yuri. He doesn't want interference, just observation. If there's more beneath the surface, he wants to know. The communication ends with a flicker from the enchanted crystal. Calcio lingers a moment, lost in thought. Peace feels distant. He can still hear the reports of death at the border in his ears. Just then, he spots Yuri stepping outside the palace with Hernando, moving like 2 kids skipping class. Hernando jokes that he used to run away from home 3 times a day. Yuri chuckles and asks how someone this clumsy ever lived long enough to become a royal mage. Hernando, beaming with rebellion, says there's no thrill quite like breaking the rules, especially when the rule-breaker's a prince. Yuri tells him they aren't sneaking out for fun, but Hernando doesn't buy it. He asks what the real plan is. With a shrug, Yuri says they're heading to the capital's biggest illegal casino. Hernando nearly chokes. He thought Yuri had matured, but now the kid's asking for directions to the city's most dangerous gambling den, and calling it a patriotic mission. That word, Brielle, is all it takes to light a fire under Hernando. He switches from skeptic to co-conspirator instantly. If there's trouble in the name of Brielle, he's in. Yuri remembers the names that echoed through the shadows of his past life. People who shaped the city from behind the curtain. There was the king of the underworld, the man who ran Brielle's black market banking system, and the infamous assassin who beheaded the old crime boss in broad daylight. That crime boss was Goryo. And now, Goryo stands in front of them, alive, smiling, and hosting them personally at his high-end casino. Goryo says it's an honor to welcome such distinguished guests. Yuri immediately understands that the man knows who they are. The welcome is no coincidence. Goryo's eyes are sharp. This is a meeting, not a game. Yuri tells him he's not here to gamble. The room shifts as Goryo drops the casual act and switches into business mode. Hernando, now realizing this isn't a night of card games, slumps in betrayal. He came for dice and drama, not debt and politics. Goryo asks if the prince needs a loan. Yuri says no, he's here to make an investment. The statement catches Goryo's attention. Most nobles don't touch his kind of money unless they're desperate. But Yuri doesn't look desperate, he looks calculated, hungry. Goryo presses, wanting to know what the money's for. Yuri tells him straight, he's planning to buy up Magranza, the rare mountain spice harvested only in Klein. He says the market's about to explode. The product is limited. The demand will spike. He intends to control it. Goryo frowns. Magranza is used in perfumes and alchemy, yes. But wars are looming. Civil unrest brews in Klein. The future is unstable. Still, Yuri speaks like a man with a map in his hand and fire in his eyes. Goryo senses it. This kid isn't guessing. He's already several moves ahead. Hernando, watching the exchange, feels like the floor is shifting under him. Yuri isn't bluffing. He's walking the line between noble and shark. This isn't a prince. This is a merchant king in the making. Goryo thinks it over. The risk is high, but the kid's confidence makes it harder to refuse. Eventually, he agrees to the deal and has the contract drawn up. Yuri signs without hesitation. It's a done deal. The future spice market belongs to him. As they leave, Hernando still hasn't recovered. He grumbles non-stop. How could the prince borrow that much money from Goryo of all people without telling him? And worse, they didn't even gamble. Not once. Yuri knew if he had told the mage the full plan, he would have dragged him back to the palace, straight to his father. That's why he kept it quiet, because he's not done yet. There's one more stop. They arrive at a rundown shop on the edge of the district. Hernando scowls at the building and says that if Yuri's still serious about business, the guild would have been a better move. Yuri ignores him and pounds on the door, calling for someone named Iraine. A sleepy, confused voice answers, and the door creaks open. A young woman peers out. Yuri introduces himself and immediately offers her a job. Hernando explodes. He can't believe the third prince of Briel is trying to hire a nobody in a falling-apart trade shack to manage something as volatile as the Magranza supply. He demands to know why Yuri is putting so much faith in someone like her. But Yuri grins, wicked and certain. To the world, she looks like a nobody, but he knows better. Iraine Wood. The name doesn't mean much now, not in this timeline. But Yuri knows better. In his past life, she became one of the most respected merchants on the continent, a legend in trade and contracts. While men like Goryo clawed their way through the muck using blackmail and extortion, Iraine thrived by keeping her word. To her, a promise carried more weight than gold. And that was exactly the kind of foundation Yuri needed. He grins to himself, that eerie little smirk pulling at his lips. In the past, Iraine had only made it as far as legendary status. But this time, Yuri plans to push her beyond that. This time, she'll become a myth, one carved into history. Hernando, trying to keep pace with Yuri's madness, finally asks if the prince is finished with all his nightly schemes. Yuri just shrugs and says there's one last stop. Of course there is. So the mage ends up chasing after him again, still grumbling under his breath, while Yuri's thoughts stay one step ahead. With the underworld's most dangerous loan shark and the future merchant queen both in his corner, all he needs now is the third and final piece. They arrive at a dirt-streaked alley where the stench of desperation hangs in the air. Children scuffle over scraps, and hopeless eyes scan the streets. Yuri scans the scene and quickly spots her. A woman crouched low, protecting a handful of filthy children. Among them, a sickly girl clings to her leg. Yuri steps forward without hesitation. He calls her by name, Asuna. In his past life, she had cut Goryo's throat and vanished into legend. An assassin born out of desperation, she had borrowed heavily from Goryo to pay for the sick child's treatment. When the debt drowned her, she sank with it, only to resurface in the underworld, blade in hand and blood on her name. Now, Yuri stands before her not as a prince, but as someone trying to rewrite fate. Asuna eyes him like a predator spotting bait, and Hernando stiffens beside him. But Yuri speaks calmly, assuring her he's not here to threaten or shame. He claims he's come to offer help to those who need it. With a quick nod, he signals Hernando, who groans as he reluctantly pulls out a heavy sack stuffed with coins. The mage doesn't want to part with it, but Yuri is insistent. He hands it to Asuna, saying nothing at first. He glances at the girl hiding behind her, the one whose illness had once cost Asuna everything. He knows she's the reason this woman walked the road to ruin. Without explaining himself, he tells Asuna to take the girl to the temple for proper care. When she asks what he wants in return for such a sum, Yuri simply smiles and says one thing. Remember his name, Yuri Briel, the third prince of the kingdom. They don't linger after that. The slums are still the slums, and there's no fairy tale ending here. But as they walk away, Hernando can't stop questioning why the prince would throw so much gold at a complete stranger. Yuri doesn't answer directly. But in truth, it's the best investment he's made all night. In just one evening, he's secured the future support of 3 of the most powerful people who will one day shape Brielle's survival: Goryo, Iraine, and Asuna. And there's still one more piece he needs. He turns to Hernando and asks a strange question. What vision did the mage see in the founder's tomb? With a half laugh and a crooked smile, Hernando says he spent the whole dream gambling away his soul in an imperial casino called Barthlegus. He says it like it's a joke, but Yuri knows better. For a man like Hernando, a gambling den isn't a joke, it's a battlefield. Yuri, satisfied, tells him to keep his mouth shut about everything that happened tonight. No king, no council, nothing. Hernando nods. He knows the stakes now. But even secrecy has its limits. Back at the castle, Fury Brielle, king of the realm, summons Hernando to the throne room. He's already caught wind that his son snuck out the night before, and he wants answers. Hernando doesn't even bother denying it. He admits that Yuri dragged him out into the city in the dead of night. When Fury asks what they were doing, Hernando hesitates, then leans into the obvious. He tells the king that they went to the capital's biggest casino. That Yuri lost money. That he lost even more. He says it all with a painfully sincere expression. Like it's nothing more than 2 fools squandering coin at a card table. Fury doesn't seem surprised. If anything, it matches what he expects from his son. To sell the story further, Hernando says he lent Yuri some coin, which the boy promptly lost. He talks about bad bets and worse luck. All lies, of course, but smooth ones. What he doesn't mention are the deals with Goryo, or the contract with Iraine, or the sack of gold handed to a forgotten assassin in the slums. When asked what else they did, he simply says they walked the streets. That Yuri wanted to see how the people lived. That by sunrise, they were back in the palace. King Fury listened to the court mage's report with quiet calculation. He could tell Hernando was holding something back, but he let it go. Pressing the issue wouldn't yield anything useful tonight. Instead, he changed the subject, casually asking if Hernando would be attending the upcoming royal ball. The mage, with his usual cocky grin, replied that he would. That answer caught the king off guard. Hernando wasn't exactly the ball-going type, but people change. Maybe it had just been too long since the mage let loose on the dance floor. Meanwhile, on the training grounds, Yuri found himself once again flat on his back, staring up at the sky after another humbling spar with the sword demon. Bernard had knocked him down clean, again. While catching his breath, Yuri noticed a stir nearby. A few maids lingered in the area, stealing glances at Bernard, whispering and blushing behind handkerchiefs. Yuri teased his mentor, pointing out the unintended fan club and suggesting he attend the ball for their sake. Bernard, unfazed, shot down the idea. He said he had no interest in such frivolous affairs. But what was on his mind, constantly, was the soul severance technique. Ever since he began studying it, it gnawed at him. He admitted that it didn't follow any recognizable form. Yuri moved through it like it was second nature, but trying to decode it through observation had yielded nothing concrete. Yuri could feel it in his bones when he used it. The way mana flowed directly through the blade was unlike anything else in the world. There was no manual. No system. Just instinct. Still, Bernard refused to give up. Maybe, he said, watching Yuri in real combat would provide more insight. He did note that Yuri's development had been staggering. His swordsmanship, mana control, it was all progressing faster than expected. But Bernard knew better. This wasn't natural growth. The boy wasn't learning. He was remembering. Trying to erase traces of the Brielle method he'd already mastered in a life no one remembered but him. With concern thick in his voice, Bernard urged him not to rush. Growth was good, but not at the cost of his body breaking down. At this pace, his frame wouldn't be able to keep up with his ambition. Yuri responded with a confident smile, assuring his teacher that he knew his limits. In fact, he claimed he felt strong enough for another round. To prove it, he tossed aside the wooden sword. Instead, he drew the ancestral blade, the sword of legend. With a cocky grin, he challenged Bernard to do the same. Bernard accepted without hesitation, unsheathing his own weapon with practiced elegance. Yuri upped the stakes. If he landed a clean hit, Bernard had to attend the royal ball. Bernard laughed it off, declining the bet. He said he had no intention of losing, and even less faith that Yuri would honor such a wager anyway. Irritated, Yuri surged forward, mana flooding into the blade as he launched himself like a shot of lightning. Steel clashed with steel, energy crackled, and laughter echoed between master and student. In the end, Yuri lost. Again. A few days later, hooves pounded against cobblestone. Noble carriages streamed toward the castle gates. The royal ball had arrived. Inside one of the most lavish coaches sat a tall, blond man clad in imperial armor. Second Prince of the Empire, Georg of Varna-Granzion, peered out the window at the capital's skyline. Opposite him sat his younger sister, Yekaterina, the princess who had once unknowingly helped ignite the downfall of Brielle. It had been years since she last set foot in this kingdom, and tonight, she had someone in particular she wanted to see. Elsewhere, the third prince was suiting up. Gone were his usual simple clothes. Tonight, Yuri wore something regal, tailored, embroidered with golden threads. It felt uncomfortable, too polished for his taste. Ina fussed over every detail, adjusting his collar, brushing invisible dust off his shoulder. She remarked that he used to love these flashy outfits. He muttered that times had changed. Just before she could leave, Yuri asked her for a dance. He claimed he needed the practice. No one else would pair with him anyway. Ina hesitated, suspicious. She suspected some trick, a stomped foot, a sudden spin into the wall. But he reached out, gently, and promised no games. Tonight, just a dance, as equals. Under the moonlight, they moved slowly, the soft rustle of their steps filling the quiet room. Ina's cheeks warmed, her nerves slowly melting as Yuri guided her in rhythm. She teased him about her dancing skills, and he asked, only half-jokingly, who she'd been practicing with. She boasted about her popularity, but admitted she'd never danced with someone quite so short. He told her not to worry, he wouldn't be short forever. For a few minutes, they danced by moonlight and laughter, her occasional missteps drawing winces from Yuri and giggles from Ina. Later, the ball began in full. Music swelled through the grand ballroom, the nobles spinning across marble floors. King Fury sat in his elevated booth, wine in hand, overseeing the festivities. Below, the three princes mingled, talking, laughing, keeping up appearances. Yuri remained watchful, eyes sweeping the crowd. He spotted Count Sitter, not sending a proxy this time but appearing in person. That meant something. Yuri turned to Cedric, his eldest brother, and asked if his worsening vision was giving him trouble. Cedric smiled and assured him he could still see just fine, for now. Trumpets rang out. All eyes turned as the imperial entourage entered. Prince Georg stepped forward, radiant and commanding, and made his way to the king. He paid his respects, and Fury welcomed him warmly. Then, Georg introduced his sister. Yekaterina emerged, and Yuri's heart dropped. Her presence was poised, graceful, everything a princess should be. But to Yuri, she was a haunting memory. Sweet smiles. Quiet laughs. A friendship that blossomed into something more, only to be shattered by betrayal and war. He remembered the pigeon-delivered apology, soaked in guilt. He remembered the bodies, the fire, the fall of Brielle. He swore in this life, they would not share a single meaningful word. From the edge of the ballroom, Yuri watched her, always staying out of range. Wherever she moved, he adjusted his path, never letting their eyes meet for too long. He saw his brother Cedric dancing with nobles, graceful as always, regal and kind, every inch the future king. Yuri couldn't help but feel like a beast in comparison. He couldn't even dodge a girl in a dress without looking clumsy. Thankfully, his second brother distracted Yekaterina with his usual charm, keeping her occupied. Later, Ina returned with a tray of cookies. Her smile, warm and effortless, helped Yuri breathe again. He asked if the event had tired her out. She joked that compared to serving him, this ball was a vacation. He took all the cookies on her tray and thanked her with a quiet grin. Then, his moment of peace was broken by a familiar presence. Prince Georg approached him with deliberate steps and an unreadable expression. In his previous life, Georg had become a military legend, commanding imperial legions and reshaping borders. Now, here he stood, looking Yuri over with curious eyes. Yuri bowed with impeccable form and introduced himself as the third prince of Brielle. Inside, every muscle in his body tensed. The weight of old blood, old rage, churned under his skin. And from the look in Georg's eyes, it was clear. He was interested in him, very interested. Yuri stood in silence, his face calm, but his heart thrummed like a war drum. Across from him, Georg of Varna-Granzion, the empire's second prince, wore a smile too sharp to be friendly. The moment their eyes met, something shifted in the air. With the ease of a man used to wielding power, Georg let out a sly smirk. That smile twisted the air around him into something suffocating. Yuri felt it immediately, an invisible force, wrapped tight around his throat like coiling blades dancing against his arteries. Each breath felt like a warning. The second prince's aura didn't just pressure him, it dissected him. Georg calmly asked if Yuri had just turned 13 this year. But before Yuri could even nod, the man turned and walked off, already satisfied. He didn't need an answer. That brief moment was enough for him to assess Yuri's strength, potential, and threat level. Yuri clenched his fists in frustration. That wasn't just a test. It was a silent threat wrapped in curiosity. He realized just how dangerous Georg truly was. The man wasn't even in his prime yet, and already his presence was suffocating. If this was a taste of what the Empire's future looked like, then it was a terrifying one. Then it happened. A shattering crash. A wine glass exploded across the ballroom floor, and all eyes turned. Ina stood frozen, crimson wine dripping from her tray, staining Georg's white cape. A stunned hush fell over the room. Everyone knew what that cape represented. Georg didn't react with anger. No, he smiled, mischievously, darkly. Yuri's heart sank. He saw it. The bastard had tripped Ina on purpose. Without a word, Georg reached for his blade. The metal slid from its sheath with a cold whisper of death. He stepped toward Ina and pressed the tip of his sword to her neck like a butcher preparing to strike. He announced that such an offense, for the Empire's laws, demanded death. Yuri's stomach turned. It wasn't about the stain. It wasn't about protocol. Georg simply wanted to make a statement, and Ina was going to be the casualty. But before the blade could bite, Fury rose from his seat. The king's voice cut across the ballroom with authority that could grind mountains to dust. He reprimanded Georg, reminding him this was Brielle, not the Empire. If he was so desperate to spill blood, he should do it in his own damn country. Georg sheathed his blade, bowed, and apologized, but his tone was honeyed with malice. Then he pivoted. He brought up the name Gatinsha, a knight from the Empire, executed by Fury on Imperial land. No demands were made. No retribution sought. The Emperor had swallowed that disgrace in the name of peace. Georg implied that sparing Ina would be dishonoring that peace. He was cornering the king. Politely, eloquently, and with just enough venom to force Fury's hand. Yuri stepped forward. He declared that Ina was his maid, his responsibility. Any punishment, then, should fall on him. He asked that, instead of killing her, Georg accept a duel trial. Let it be settled with swords, not slaughter. Georg stared at him, and then laughed. The boy had guts. He wouldn't forget this name now. Prince Yuri of Brielle. Georg turned to the king and agreed. But, of course, he wouldn't sully his own hands. He offered a proxy. A knight from his guard, the youngest among them, someone near Yuri's level. Fury accepted with thinly veiled reluctance. He was watching his son walk into a lion's jaws, but there was no other way. Georg, now satisfied, left the ballroom. The tension fell away like a dying flame. Yuri rushed to Ina. She was still trembling. He tried to lift her, but her body was limp. Her eyes wouldn't meet his. She blamed herself for putting him in danger. The maids arrived and helped carry her out. Yuri turned and accidentally came face to face with Yekaterina. Gone was the warm smile from earlier. In its place, a distant coldness, shaded with uncertainty. Yuri closed his eyes and turned away. The past was dead. He wouldn't let it drag him down again. From the sidelines, Hernando watched, sipping wine, silently taking it all in. Later that night, in a quiet hallway, Yuri passed his older brother. Cedric stood leaning against the wall, his usual easygoing nature gone. He asked his little brother what he planned to do. Yuri confessed that he couldn't stomach the thought of Georg cutting Ina down like an animal. Cedric ruffled his hair, a rare show of warmth from the usually composed crown prince. He offered his help, his resources, his voice at court. He made it clear that Georg's so-called act of mercy, choosing a proxy, was anything but kindness. A younger knight could be more reckless, more dangerous. A staged accident could end it all. Yuri refused the offer. He started this, he would finish it. Cedric studied his little brother's face, and in that moment, he understood. This wasn't the same boy from before. He nodded and backed off, trusting him completely. The ballroom still buzzed with tension after Georg's exit, but Cedric returned to his place, ready to smooth things over. As for Yuri, he had his eyes set on something else entirely. The trial. It didn't take long for Georg to select his proxy. A red-headed prodigy from the Imperial Military Academy, young but already glowing with power, stepped onto the dueling grounds. The kid practically radiated confidence. The nobles took their seats, buzzing with curiosity. Captain Synod sat beside Hernando, who, unsurprisingly, looked far too relaxed for the moment. Synod whispered that the Imperial Knight's aura was dangerously steady, clean, practiced, lethal. His movements showed discipline that could only come from years of elite training. Meanwhile, Yuri yawned, casually stretching his arms like the whole thing bored him. He didn't look scared. If anything, he looked annoyed. Hernando chuckled beside Synod and muttered that the third prince had it under control. One boy carried the honor of Brielle, the other, the pride of the empire. And in the heart of the kingdom, beneath a sky filled with candlelight and the eyes of nobles and kings, the stage was set. Hernando, swirling his wine, calmly claims there's nothing to worry about. In this world, the rank of Grand Wizard is nearly mythical. Only those who master origin magic, like fate-revealing magic, reach that height. The only person to ever succeed, himself. He remembers when Yuri, in his self-destructive gambling phase, once beat him at cards. Hernando chalked it up to bad luck at first, but his magic lets him read fate, and Yuri's future remained an empty void. Strange visions of a bloodied boy on Sword Mountain fighting hordes flashed instead. That son of Brielle fought and collapsed in despair. Back then, Hernando had dismissed the whole vision as nothing more than a fluke, an odd hiccup in his otherwise flawless magical insight. Just some anomaly. A harmless illusion. Maybe even a side effect of overwork or boredom. That's what he told himself, but the truth refused to stay buried. After that strange vision, he began noticing it, an anomaly in the order of things, a subtle crack in fate's architecture. And at the center of it all was the third prince. He had watched the boy closely, standing beside him through every unexplainable shift, every illogical change, every action that defied the pre-written flow of time. The kid didn't follow a path, he forged one. Now, it was all clicking into place. Hernando no longer had doubts. Prince Yuri Brielle was the boy with no destiny. A man unbound by fate itself. And right now, that walking contradiction stood at the edge of the arena, ready to show everyone what that meant. On the other side of the dueling platform, the Imperial Knight sharpened his stance, loosening his shoulders with practiced swings. The sound of his blade cutting the air grated on Yuri's nerves like an annoying fly buzzing too close to the ear. His patience thinned by the second. Second Prince Georg raised his voice, asking both combatants if they were prepared. The third prince nodded with the slightest smirk. The knight across from him offered a crisp salute in response. And then, under the heavy silence of royal scrutiny, the trial duel began. Both fighters opened with distance, circling like predators, searching for the first twitch, the first mistake. The tension cracked as soon as the starting signal dropped. Yuri exploded forward in a blur, too fast to track. The knight blinked, and for a terrifying moment, he imagined his torso erased, cleanly split by the oncoming strike. But instinct, muscle memory, and training won over panic. He raised his blade in time, parrying the first blow. Sparks flew. Metal clashed. The duel burst into full momentum. Each strike came with terrifying speed, the rhythm almost inhuman. They weaved between offense and defense in a blink, blades flickering across the arena like lightning. Yuri's body flowed as though his blade were an extension of his will. His sword didn't follow conventional forms. It shifted, adapted, danced with both precision and chaos. It was unorthodox, wild, and refined all at once. And with every swing, his grin widened. A shallow cut bloomed across the knight's cheek, crimson painting his pale skin. The first real hit. In the royal booth, King Fury turned to his court mage and asked the question that had been gnawing at his mind. How would this end? Hernando didn't even try to bluff. He admitted with a grin that he couldn't see the outcome. For once, the all-seeing mage was blind, and loving every second of it. The king chuckled quietly, remembering when this strange magician first arrived in Brielle, claiming the heavens had sent him. Fury asked if those signs now pointed to Hernando leaving, but the mage shook his head and firmly stated no, he wasn't going anywhere. The king relaxed. A man like Hernando was worth his weight in entire armies. Fury reminded him, half joking, that too much humility can tempt misfortune. Hernando smiled and gestured back toward the arena, suggesting they focus on the fight. When Fury asked who the superior swordsman was, the king answered without hesitation. It had to be the Empire's knight. No bias, just logic. And he wasn't wrong. In every measurable way, the Imperial Knight was more experienced, more seasoned, and forged by the Empire's brutal training methods. But that's exactly why Hernando knew he had stayed in the right kingdom. The heavens didn't send him to watch a king. They sent him to follow a storm. At first, he thought the prophecy led him to Fury, but after years of peace and stagnation, he believed maybe his mission had passed. That he could leave. But now, watching Yuri slice through expectations, Hernando knew his real journey was just beginning. The Imperial Knight darted forward, looking to end the match with a clean rush. Yuri didn't back down. Instead, he surged his mana into his ancestral blade, flooding the weapon with energy. His steps grew lighter, faster. He vanished from sight and reappeared in an instant. The knight's breath caught in his throat. The killing intent was real now. The mana in the air buzzed, hot and thick. The blade danced past his guard and reached for his throat. He closed his eyes. He had no time to block. Everyone watching froze. Even the Empire's royal entourage leaned forward, eyes wide in disbelief. Fury followed the flow, reading the moves with the eyes of a seasoned master. Captain Sand stood dumbfounded, mouth slightly open. And Hernando? He smiled. At the very last moment, Yuri twisted his wrist. The blade veered. Instead of cleaving through flesh, it hovered. A hair's breadth away. The knight stood still, blinking in disbelief. Then he lowered his sword and surrendered with dignity. The crowd erupted. Cheering echoed across the arena. Applause thundered from the stands. Hernando didn't move. He just watched, feeling something stir deep in his gut. Something ancient. Something divine. He had traveled the world chasing omens and portents, but none of them could have predicted this. Yuri Briel, a man who walked outside the threads of fate. A boy who stepped where no prophecy dared to go. In that moment, Hernando realized his own destiny had changed. And so had the princes. Yuri was the outlier in a world built on predestination. A living contradiction. The mage felt chills thinking about what this boy would do next. What chaos he would bring. What miracles he might spark. The storm was just beginning, and Hernando was ready to follow it. 5 years later, peace reigned in Briel, on the surface. Inside the grand castle, a nervous young maid sprinted through the halls, clutching her assignment sheet with sweaty fingers. It was her first day, and she had already lost her way. She turned a corner and froze. A dark-haired man stood before her, eyes cold, steps twisted. His presence was unmistakable. Royalty. But not the king. Not the crown prince. This one was dangerous. He stared her down, demanding to know why she was wandering without purpose. She tried to explain, but her words fumbled. He raised his voice, accusing her of ignoring protocol. Asked if she had some guidebook explaining how to avoid him. The poor maid wilted under the pressure, scrambling for a way to appease the intimidating figure. Running out of patience, the prince finally decided it was time to dish out some heavy education on the new maid. Before he could deliver his lecture, a relaxed voice interrupted, calling out for him to cut the creepy behavior. When Newbie was still training for her castle duties, the seniors had told her to memorize one name above all. If she spotted someone walking around with a confident posture and a sword at his waist, she was to show utmost respect to the charming and unpredictable third prince. Sure enough, it was him. Yuri Briel. After prying his brother away from the flustered maid, Yuri decided to take a walk through the courtyard, snacking on the sweets she offered him as a thank you. The treats were rich and sugary, a pleasant surprise. Once he finished wiping his mouth and brushing off his hands, Yuri focused. He was at the unarmed realm now, a level where mana control had become so refined, his body maintained pressure and efficiency regardless of whether or not he held a weapon. Achieving this state had taken years. 5 years, to be exact, since he was cut down by Lawrence's undead blade and thrown back into the body of his 13-year-old self. Now at 18, the quiet stretch of peace was clearly nearing its end. And speaking of endings, those crusty old men who ran the kingdom were probably at it again, making a mess of things. Yuri made his way toward the conference chamber. He knocked, then raised his voice, asking to be let in. No response. From behind the heavy doors, raised voices could be heard, the usual choir of noble outrage. The guard standing watch sheepishly suggested he try knocking again. Yuri, done playing polite, let mana surge through his fist and punched the doors clean open. Startled gasps filled the room as high-ranking nobles stared at the prince standing in the wreckage of the doorway. Yuri casually apologized for the forceful entrance, explaining he'd knocked already, but nobody seemed to hear. So he knocked a bit louder. Turning to the head of the table, he addressed his father and asked to join the discussion. Granted a seat, Yuri settled in just as the final and most controversial topic resumed. A young count spoke with urgency, stating they lacked the spare troops needed to assist the allies outside the border. He declared that if the Empire's plea for help was to be ignored, the nobles themselves should bear the consequences. Yuri understood why emotions were high. Everyone in the room was busy calculating losses and gains, debating not with conviction but with coin in mind. It was a political numbers game. But he already knew how this game ended. The Empire had called for troops to form a united allied front to face a massive orc threat from the east. Nations were expected to contribute forces in a show of unity. What none of them knew was that this effort would collapse. The orcs would break through the lines, shatter morale, and charge into neighboring lands. Curiously, they would avoid attacking the Empire itself. Only then would the truth be revealed. The letter, the raid, the so-called cooperation, all part of an imperial ruse. In that chaos, Briel lost legends, including Sir Leon Flandre, one of its brightest knights. Yuri clenched his jaw. This time, he was here. He would not let history repeat itself. As nobles argued over logistics and resources, he stood and declared that he would go. If Briel needed to show good faith to the world, he would serve as their symbol. He urged the gathered lords to act with dignity, to stop dragging the kingdom's name through the mud. The king, observing his son speak with unexpected clarity, couldn't help but smirk. His boy had arrived with exactly the right answer, one that satisfied duty, optics, and logic all in one strike. Later that day, Yuri returned to his preferred battleground, the training grounds. Bernard, his old sparring partner and mentor, was already there. As they warmed up, Yuri's obnoxious brother came sprinting into the arena, looking like he'd just heard the end of the world. He blurted out a question, asking if the rumors were true. Was his little brother really heading to the front lines? Yuri confirmed it. The second prince couldn't comprehend why anyone with royal blood would throw themselves into danger. Yuri calmly explained that protecting the kingdom was part of their job. His older brother sighed dramatically, then said that he finally understood the depth of Yuri's thinking. With tears practically forming in his eyes, he promised to guard the palace in Yuri's absence. Then, in his usual ridiculous fashion, he jogged away like a man possessed by clumsiness. Yuri hoped that the fool would at least avoid starting any fires while he was gone. He turned back to Bernard and asked if the old sword demon was worried. Bernard, ever the pragmatist, said that as long as Yuri didn't try anything suicidal, he'd be just fine. Coming from him, that was practically glowing praise. Still, Bernard reminded him to stay alert. Orcs weren't just big brutes. They were cunning, savage, and incredibly difficult to put down. He warned the kid to be on the lookout for orcs carrying tattered flags strapped to their backs. Those ones were different. They weren't just your average grunts. They were orc vols, a brutal breed of monsters that made normal orcs look like toddlers playing with sticks. Bernard emphasized that those beasts didn't just fight, they hunted, killed, and did it all with terrifying skill. They were born from carnage and raised in blood. Yuri, calm as ever, assured his mentor that he would be fine. He insisted he had his own ways of dealing with problems. Before Bernard could argue, the training hall door burst open and Ina stumbled in, panting heavily. Her face was flushed, and her hands were on her knees as she tried to catch her breath. She announced that Yuri's guest had arrived and brought along that specific item he had been waiting for. Whatever the third prince had planned for the doomed orc raid, it involved something very particular. Ina added that the guest was already in his office, sipping tea like he owned the place. Yuri made his way to the room and stepped inside to find Guillermo, the vice president of the Elaine Merchant Guild, standing up to greet him with practiced reverence. Yuri blinked in mild disappointment, having expected to see Elaine herself. Guillermo explained that his superior was currently traveling, as she always insisted on handling high-risk trades personally. It was what she claimed to do best. Still, Guillermo hadn't come empty-handed. He presented the ornate box Yuri had ordered with great care. When the third prince cracked it open, his eyes lit up. Resting inside was the four-piece dagger set known as Elementarian. Guillermo had gone through hell trying to procure it. The price had nearly given him a heart attack, more than he'd ever spent on something that looked like wall decor. But these weren't just pretty blades. They were ancient magical artifacts laced with power from a forgotten age. As Yuri held one up, Guillermo watched the faint shimmer of mana gathering around the prince's fingers. When the blade responded like it recognized its wielder, Guillermo felt his spine lock up. Yuri, noticing the reaction, slowly moved the tip toward the merchant's face, just close enough to elicit a visible flinch. He pulled the weapon back with a small grin. Guillermo exhaled deeply, mumbling about how terrifyingly skilled the prince had become. Before the conversation could continue, something shifted in the corner of the room. A dark figure entered silently, a blur of shadow to most, but not to Yuri. He caught it immediately, while Guillermo, oblivious, kept talking. Yuri took that as his cue. He thanked Guillermo for the delivery and dismissed him, adding that he expected a detailed update on the Empire's preparations for the coming raid. Once the man was gone, the third prince collapsed onto the couch with a sigh and called out for the presence behind the curtain to reveal itself. Out stepped Asuna, dressed head to toe in her assassin's attire. Her presence radiated cold professionalism. First thing he asked was whether the Goryo situation had been resolved. She confirmed that she had paid the loan shark a midnight visit and delivered a message that would stick. Apparently, the greedy bastard had been circling Elaine's funds like a vulture, and Yuri had finally decided to clip his wings. Asuna had made it clear that Goryo was to back off. Then, shifting gears, she mentioned the chatter among the palace staff. Word had gotten around that Yuri was marching with the Union Army. Concern flickered across her face as she warned him to be careful. She made it sound like he was heading straight into a war zone by himself. But Yuri corrected her. She was going too. He said it plainly. Asuna would be accompanying him on this mission. When he asked if she could keep up, the stoic assassin gave a rare smile. Beautiful, genuine, dangerous. She said she had no intention of staying behind. Wherever he went, she would follow. A few days later, the moment of departure finally came. Yuri was in his chamber, adjusting the clasps on his new black armor when Cedric arrived. The crown prince looked worn, his eyes still tired from too many nights buried in documents. He asked Yuri to stay safe. That was all he wanted. Yuri replied with confidence, assuring his older brother that he was practically invincible. He intended to make a statement out there, to uplift Briel's name on the battlefield. In return, he told Cedric to look after his own health, specifically, his eyes, which had clearly been strained from all that reading. Before they parted ways, Cedric pulled him into a tight embrace. There was no lecture, no royal formality. Just a brother holding his younger sibling close, hoping this wouldn't be the last time. Yuri promised him that it wouldn't. Outside, the horns sounded loud and clear across the capital. Every soldier in the staging area turned their eyes toward the signal. It was time to march. Up on the raised platform, King Fury stood tall before his people, his presence commanding silence as he lifted a hand to signal the formal commencement of the ceremony. The commander of the royal army stepped forward, his boots thudding with weight and authority as he ascended the carpeted stairs with unwavering confidence. The third prince of the kingdom stood nearby, his newly forged armor gleaming beneath the midday sun, casting a resolute aura that could not be ignored. Speaking not as a king, but as a father, Fury addressed his son with a knowing expression and asked if he was feeling the weight of nerves yet. He instructed the young man to turn around and look upon the men who would march under his command. Each soldier in the town square below, lined up with pride and precision, represented a life that now rested on his shoulders. Fury reminded him with gravity that, in the harsh reality of war, not all those soldiers would return. Some would fall. But the third prince, having lived through the carnage of a different lifetime, vowed within himself that they would not meet the same pitiful fate as before. For the final time, the king asked if his son was ready to carry such an immense burden. Before Yuri could even voice an answer, the air shifted, thickening into something sharp, hostile, and suffocating. The entire town square seemed to freeze as the young prince turned and faced the man now standing in front of him. Murderous intent surged in the atmosphere like a blade against his throat. Yuri felt his body instinctively lock in place. His hands trembled. Every fiber of his being screamed that the approaching presence meant to end him where he stood. It was no longer a man, but a force, death itself, cloaked in flesh, lifting a blade with the precision of finality. He knew. If he moved even slightly to the wrong side, he would die. There was no mistaking it. But Yuri Briel had not spent his life idly. He had shaped his core through trial and pain, his reflexes honed by countless battles. Summoning his inner strength, he activated the mana within and broke free from the terrifying grip of paralysis. Slowly, he drew his sword and assumed a firm stance, steady, grounded, unshaken. He didn't let fear dictate the rhythm. Instead, he lunged with precision, executing the soul-severing slash just as death's blade descended. Steel clashed against steel, and in a blinding instant, the two forces met in perfect equilibrium. Onlookers held their breath. Up on the platform, it became clear who the Phantom of Death had truly been, none other than King Fury himself. The king smiled, the expression rare and satisfied. He praised his son, saying that the strike had been worthy, a fitting letter of departure. With that, the ceremony had ended. King Fury was not one to prolong such moments. He simply asked his son to return, alive. Like a man seasoned beyond his years, Yuri turned to face the army amassed before him. His men stared back with unwavering loyalty. He raised his blade high. Their cheers thundered through the square as they chanted his name. With calm conviction, he called on every soldier present to place their trust in him completely. They would walk through hell, but they would walk together. Swords were raised. The great banner of Briel was hoisted high. The soldiers of the kingdom began their march. Far from the capital, along the rugged border, the news of Yuri Briel's departure reached the ears of a man who had long waited for this moment. In the depths of a military dungeon, where captured orcs were restrained for critical research, Count Sitter, the unshakable bulwark guarding Briel's frontier, paused in thought. After 5 long years, the prince he had heard so much about was finally coming. A vivid sunset stretched across the sky, casting a warm, crimson glow over the dense forest below. Golden hues slipped between the trees while birds crossed the horizon in quiet formation. The air was still, broken only by the rustle of leaves stirred by the wind. Armored figures rested among the woods, gathered in loose clusters beside their tethered horses. One of them crouched beneath a thick oak, water pouch in hand, his focus unwavering. Yuri commented that they had traveled quite far. Addressing a knight beside him, he asked Sir Raymond how much distance they had covered. Sir Raymond, standing with confidence and holding a worn map, explained that they had reached the edges of Sitter. He added that after pressing on just a bit further, they would arrive at the borderland itself. From there, they would pass through God and then on to Bally Point, Bashard. Yuri then asked whether their current pace would get them there in time. Sir Raymond assured him that it would. A soldier approached and addressed the prince with respectful urgency. Yuri turned at the sound, only for the sight before him to drain the color from his face. His jaw tightened. The man who stood there in armor was unmistakable. Laurent Flandre, the very knight who had taken his life in the last timeline. Jean-Laurent Minori, Count of Frances, introduced himself with perfect decorum. He said that it was a true honor to meet the third prince. Yuri observed as Laurent knelt low, head bowed. The knight spoke his name, Laurent Flandre, with earnest reverence. Yuri, still shaken by the weight of memory, muttered a distracted acknowledgement. Laurent lifted his gaze with a trace of blush in his expression. he announced that there was something he had always wanted to say. Yuri, caught off guard, asked what it was. Beaming, Laurent declared that he had long admired him. Yuri blinked, stunned, and asked what he meant. With enthusiasm, Laurent explained that after hearing from his father about what had happened 5 years ago, he had looked up to the prince ever since. He said that the way Yuri had drawn his sword in defense of a maid was the very embodiment of knighthood. Their conversation lingered in an awkward silence. Yuri replied that he had heard much about Laurent through his father, Sir Lien, and said he looked forward to working alongside him. Laurent responded loudly that it would be his honor to serve. Sir Raymond announced that it was time to move. Yuri nodded. Raymond warned the prince with a note of caution. He said Count Sitter was not known for being warm and advised him not to take any coldness personally. As night blanketed the sky, stars emerged one by one. A grand castle rose ahead, towering over the terrain. A ceremonial banner fluttered in the wind at the gates, bearing the message, "We welcome the third prince." Soldiers assembled at the entrance, lined in precise formation. At their head stood a man who smiled politely and declared that it was an honor to receive his highness. That man was Jamie Theodore, Margrave of Sitter. Yuri offered his thanks for the welcome. Jamie commented that someone so young serving on the front lines earned his respect. With a measured tone, Jamie asked if the prince had ever fought orcs before. Yuri began to say that he had, but then corrected himself. He admitted he had never fought them directly, though he had studied them. He explained that most of their current force lacked first-hand experience with orcs, so he thought it best to be prepared. Jamie acknowledged that and said he found the prince's diligence admirable. Lowering his voice, Jamie added that if it was acceptable, he wished to offer a gift. Yuri tilted his head in curiosity as Jamie motioned toward an enormous set of doors. Soon after, the prince stood before them. Jamie slowly released the latch. The iron doors groaned open. Torches lined the path ahead, casting long shadows across stone walls. Soldiers followed cautiously, led by Jamie. The echoes of armor clanked through the corridor. Jamie, gripping the torch, told the prince that what he sought was just ahead. Yuri and his group advanced with wary steps. The torchlight finally touched the edge of a vast chamber. Jamie and his men stayed behind, closing the doors with a hollow clang. Yuri's expression darkened. He demanded to know what this was. What did Jamie mean by this? Jamie, unmoved, urged him to remain calm. Flames flared to life, illuminating the space with harsh light. The sight ahead turned blood cold. A knight stammered in disbelief, unable to form words. Another cried out that they were staring at orcs. Behind thick bars, twisted and brutalized orcs snarled and snapped. The stench of blood hung in the air. Jamie stated that, for now, these creatures were prisoners. He explained that in order to survive, they had studied them thoroughly, everything from minor behavior to primal instincts. Yuri asked if this was the gift he had mentioned. Jamie confirmed that it was. He said that with war looming against the Velomans, no other gift could compare. Yuri thanked him, though disbelief flickered in his eyes. Inwardly, he noted that Jamie was even more deranged than expected. He turned to a visibly shaken soldier beside him and asked for his name. The soldier straightened and answered that he was Simon Pesci, son of Baron Wolf. Yuri ordered him to speak his honest thoughts aloud. Simon hesitated but then said that it felt wrong. It seemed excessive to do this to prisoners of war. Yuri paused, then replied that he could see why someone might feel that way. Then he turned to Jamie and ordered the cage to be opened. Jamie obeyed without pause. The iron bars groaned as the gate swung open. Yuri confirmed Simon's name, then declared that this would be real combat. He ordered him to fight. Simon hesitated, then stepped forward, sword drawn. The orc within, eyes burning red, gave a thunderous roar. Simon readied himself. But instead of attacking, the orc began smashing its head against the ground, a display that unnerved Simon deeply. Spinning around, Simon shouted that this was madness. Forcing him to fight a creature so broken was inhumane. As if mocking him, the orc lunged the moment Simon's back was turned. The blow landed with precision. Simon collapsed with a pained cry. A soldier cried his name in panic. The orc pinned Simon in a crushing hold, snarling with feral rage. The others tensed, ready to charge in. But the prince remained calm and ordered them to stand down. He explained that most of the orc's tendons had already been severed. Sir Jamie confirmed this beside him. The prince's gaze remained locked on the brutal scene as Jamie repeated coldly, "These are orcs."